We're currently in a very iconic location which is recognisable instantaneously to Londoners or to tourists. But many people actually mispronounce the name of this location. Many people call it St Katharine's Docks, when in fact it's St Katharine Docks. An easy mistake to make, and the reason for this is because the other side of that factory there, the factory which rests behind this brutalist hotel, is the Tower of London. What sat beside the Tower of London was St Katharine's Church, which was demolished, and in its place came St Katharine Docks, the West Dock and the East Dock. So it's easy to see once it's explained why so many people, even long-term Londoners, mispronounce the name of this location. Now, the people at the time weren't happy to see St Katharine Church actually torn down, but it did see a regeneration of life within the area. So, as usual, I'll try and make this as quick and as simple as possible so that you can absorb as much necessary information out of a short video as opposed to a lengthy diatribe. Under Queen Elizabeth's reign, goods coming into the Thames was forever increasing, but the issue of piracy was causing loss of income to the throne. This is where we saw the creation of the legal quays under the Legal Quays Act, which meant that all boats coming in to London had to be unloaded in official ports. This is the same as declaring your goods, basically. This meant that whatever came into the country, it had to be registered, and there was some sort of tax system. And this disallowed anyone catching up with the finances of the royals and so on. If you like, you could say that they used their power to maintain power, because in such times, coming into too much wealth, you could amass your own army, start your own country, dare I say. So it was important that the goods being brought in were monopolised by the people in charge. This wing was incredibly packed. Now, this wing here, this would be the West Wing. So we're looking towards West London. And if Dan just pans the camera ever so slightly over here, you'll see the East Wing. Now, I'm jumping forward in time ever so slightly, but during World War II, that was basically a dumping ground, because where the bombs destroyed the place, a lot of debris was being brushed into the basin, which was, or the dock, which was unusable, to keep the roads clear. Now, just because the quays were created, it's a bit like saying just because prisons exist that people won't commit crime. Piracy was rampant, especially in Wapping. It's another story for another day that we intend to cover once again. Now, this would go on through the Tudor dynasty and into the Jacobean, what we know as the Stuarts. It never ended, really, all the way until today. Piracy still continues across the world. And to be a pirate during the 15, 16, 1700s, you could have just been a chap that was jumping onto the River Thames to pinch a few boxes of cargo. It wasn't a swashbuckling, rum-drinking chap somewhere out near Jamaica. This was piracy London style. Now, eventually, the trade would become too heavy for this bit of the river, and it would take weeks for some boats to unload, which means most of the stock would be spoilt by the time it was being unloaded. So you may as well have just given it to the thieves at that point, and you're making major losses, not just with the goods you're bringing in, but people are paying for the voyages, and the voyages are not now coming out with enough income to make up for the next voyage and so on. So something had to be done. And this is why, by 1799, we saw the West India Docks Act, which would see the Isle of Dogs become the famous docks that we know it to be. Over time, by the late 1700s, early 1800s, it was becoming too much even for them. And the docks were brought back to life in a better way, whether it was from Limehouse all the way up here. And that is when the decision was made for Thomas Telford to design what we now know as St Katharine docks, and he did this as quickly as he could, and it took about 3 years to make them. But unfortunately for him and his investors, it wasn't around long enough to really make their money back, because what with trains, the necessity of the dock was no longer as important, because the docks made a lot of their money through storage in these warehouses. And when the warehouses were no longer needed, they started to lose major money. Now, it wasn't just the trains that killed them, but another law came in to speed the process up, which meant that lightmen or lightermen, the chaps that worked on the Thames, could come into the docks and take the goods directly from the boat to the market or a distributor, as opposed to them needing to be stored in great big warehouses like that. And this majorly cut the profits of the docks. London docks, for instance, are completely gone, which are just over there, and they're all filled in now, and that's where you see the estates of Wapping. But once, from Tower Bridge over there, the docks ran all the way down, all the way past Limehouse, all the way to what we today call the Isle of Dogs. Now, later, the industry here would then basically become up for grabs. And when this land was sold, luckily, some of the warehouses were preserved, like the one behind me. Now, in World War II, this place was blown to bits, and the actual East Dock over there, which I mentioned a moment ago, was desecrated. Now, that's why, if we look at the East Dock, it's what I deem as very unappealing, all new builds. It looks like it could have been built somewhere in Milton Keynes from scratch. It doesn't look like it's a dock site that we should celebrate for having been there for centuries. Now, however, the West Dock did keep some of its charm, but that's only thanks to the industry. And as I will say, as I say often, right, England's very unique in that the Industrial Revolution was a really difficult time to work and live in. Except today, the buildings that we suffered in are kept as if they are quaint reminders of our culture. So today, just down the road in Wapping, people pay mass amounts of money to buy apartment studio flats in buildings that people were once dying in 16-hour work days of phosphorus fumes or God knows what else. And I find that a very ironic feature in England. You know, in France, you want to see something beautiful, you go and see a chalet. Here, they turn an old factory into a place where you're going to buy an apartment. Definitely a bit of food for thought. So this is the very recognisable Dickens Inn, named after the 1800s novelist Charles Dickens, who frequented Wapping often, and Limehouse. He actually took a lot of his influence by observing the suffering of the people in the warehouses, and it's where we'd get stories like Oliver Twist and so on. He would take some of the characters from some of the more depraved parts of London in order to paint his fiction, which ultimately it wasn't that fictional compared with real life. Dickens was quite a dark writer, as I've said before, which is why I feel I connect with him. Now, the building behind us is stunning, but it's not a traditional pub in today's terms. A function hall, if you like, with different rooms that you can rent and enjoy. It's not what we'd call a traditional pub. It could have been, and if our environment was a little bit different, it could be. But it doesn't mean it's any less majestic and stunning to the eye. And if you was taking a lady out into the city and wanted to impress her, or, well, next to the city, you'd probably bring her to somewhere like the Dickens. Now, what is really interesting about this building is that there's a huge chance that it was one of the tea warehouses. We don't know that for sure. And if it was one of the tea warehouses, it will explain why it was so important and it's still here, because tea was one of the major commodities coming in, and tea was up there as a commodity for helping to fund the empire, just the power of Britain altogether. If you think tea is big today, you should have been here in the 17 and 1800s, because people would literally bite your hand off for it. And this warehouse, like others across the way, is supposed to have been where tea was stored, which meant it would have probably been more secure compared with others. And thanks to being so close to the city and so close to the tower, it had far better security than, say, if you was somewhere down in Limehouse where there was opium dens and whatnot. Now, this building actually moved 70 meters to the east. My dad, when he was a young man, early 20s, started working for an architect firm called Taylor Woodrow, and they told him that not long before he'd started working there how they moved it. And they stripped it down, because obviously they had to rebuild the brickwork, but they stripped down to the inner core woodwork and raised it and moved it 70 meters to the east, plonked it back down and rebuilt the brickwork around it. Now, this is fascinating for so many reasons. We are smashing down old terrace housing and old pubs, and we're putting up disgusting glass and metal features. But when the council say so, that's the length that people will go to preserve something. It's a huge reminder to us that this is what we should have as a basic standard, not just in East London, but across Britain. And we have absolutely no need to smash something down. And even if you're going to build something new, why can't it look something like that?